Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Leibowitz. One of the things that's always driven me is, at least since my 20s, is curiosity. I've wanted to learn, I wanted to know about the world. And I'm also curious about curiosity itself. I want to know what drives it, what makes it what it is, what are its benefits. So today's guest is the perfect guy to talk to us about that. He's a professor of psychology and marketing at the University of Texas at Austin. He's published more than 150 scholarly works about cognitive science, and he's written several books, including Smart Thinking, Smart Change. Professor Art Markman, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
So first of all, what led to your own interest in curiosity? What made you curious about curiosity?
It's funny. My interest in the topic goes back a long way, and I've been very interested in creative idea generation. How do we develop new ideas for things? And as you begin to look at that, one of the things you discover is that the many of the most creative people have a profile that I sometimes call the expert generalist. They're people who know a lot about a lot of different things, and they use that extensive knowledge base to help them recognize parallels between a situation that they're in and some other thing that they know about that may come from a different area. So to give you an example that I used right at the start of my book, Smart Thinking, James Dyson, when he was trying to come up with a way of improving vacuum cleaners by getting rid of the bag of the vacuum cleaner, recognized that vacuum cleaners are trying to do the same kind of thing that sawmills have to do. So sawmills have a lot of sawdust in the air, which they suck out essentially with a gigantic vacuum cleaner. But instead of having a gigantic vacuum cleaner bag, they employ a device called an industrial cyclone that creates a circular motion of the air and throws particles to the side where they slide down into a hopper. And he then spent a lot of time developing prototypes of building a tiny industrial cyclone inside a device the size of a home vacuum cleaner. But if he hadn't known about sawmills, which he just knew about because he was curious, then he wouldn't have been led to this insight that you could take this solution from sawmills and turn it into something that would change the nature of a common household device. So, what interests me is the people who develop lots of creative ideas. They have this broad knowledge base. They have to be intensely curious. What is it that drives that, so that we can encourage it in other people and get more people really thinking in these more innovative ways?
Prior to reading your article, it was in Psychology Today magazine or Psychology Today online, I'd never considered this, but you talked about there's broadly speaking, two types of curiosity: state curiosity and trait curiosity. What does this mean? What's the difference?
Yeah, so when psychologists talk about states versus traits, what they're talking about is a state is your motivational inclination in the moment because of the situation that you're in. Whereas trait curiosity is, all else being equal, what's your motivational orientation to the world? So state curiosity says, in this moment, something has driven me to want to be curious about something. So, for example, you might not be a particularly trait curious person. You might not be somebody who routinely goes searching for information, but you've probably had the experience of sitting watching a TV show or a movie at home, and suddenly you seem to recognize an actor in the movie, and you think, wait, where did I see that person before? And now you're having a conversation with the other person watching the movie, and maybe you pull up IMDb or something else, and you've got to know the answer. So the situation has driven you to want an answer to something that even if in general you don't seem to be the kind of person who routinely goes down rabbit holes trying to dig up new information.
So in the case of state curiosity, what leads a person to suddenly, I mean, you gave it a good example there of watching a movie, but what is most commonly associated with a person becoming state curious?
Yeah, so in general, you have to have something where you think I ought to know the answer to this, and you also feel like I'm not sure I know the answer. So I'm not, most of us aren't particularly curious about things where we think we know the answer, and we're pretty much basically 100% sure we do know the answer. We don't go checking ourselves on that.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't go looking up your own phone number or the name of the town you live in. You know that you know it. There's no curiosity associated with it, and of course there's lots of things we don't care about at all. So there has to be this desire to know, this belief that I should know and probably and might know, but also a recognition that I'm not completely sure. And that's why that situation of the movie actor that looks familiar is interesting, because in that moment you're thinking, okay, I should know this. I should know this. I just saw that person. But I don't know it. And then it begins to gnaw at you. And that's the point where you really want to know the answer.
Yeah, that is an aggravating feeling when a
Yeah.
face looks familiar and you're like, where did I see this lady before?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the state curiosity. What about trait curiosity? What factors are associated with a person being trait curious?
Yeah, so the interesting thing there is it seems to be driven by a few different elements. So one is there's if you look at what are called the big five personality characteristics, which are kind of the single largest differences between people in the way we're motivated. One of those big five characteristics is something called openness to experience. And some people are very open. They find new ideas, new products, new things really intriguing.
Now,
And other
hold on
people,
1 second. I want to ask you something. When it
yeah,
comes to the big five, right? It's not a matter of you either have it or you don't. You're on a continuum. Everybody has it. It's just a matter of degree to which extent, right?
that's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. So these poles of these dimensions, if you look at the way they're distributed in the population, it's what we call a well-behaved distribution centered around the middle. So it looks like that kind of familiar normal bell shape, and with most people being in the middle and having elements of both poles. But some people are extreme on a particular dimension and may actually exhibit primarily one pole or the other. And the more open to experience you are, in general, the more curious you tend to be. So people who find new ideas intriguing and interesting, they tend to then gravitate towards wanting to find out more. Whereas people who are on the closed to experience end tend to be less curious overall. That's one factor. A second factor that plays a role in this is that there's another characteristic that's not part of the big five, but it's called need for cognition, and it goes by some other names. It's related to another dimension that psychologists have studied called need for closure, and it reflects essentially as a trait, how much do you really enjoy? Are you motivated to think about stuff? And so we all know some people who love to just think about things and read and go down those rabbit holes, and other people who seem blissfully uninterested in thinking deeply about things. And again, some people may fall in between. It's another characteristic with a pretty good distribution on it. But people who are, the more open to experience you are, combined with the more need that you have for cognition, that creates a motivational duality in which you find new things kind of interesting and you like to think about things. So you end up really digging into it, and you come across a new idea, and then you find a magazine article about it, and then you watch a little documentary, and then you talk to your friends about it, and so those people tend to have that real trait curiosity.
It's it seems obvious that curiosity would be a benefit in the sense of the more curious I am, the more experiences I'm going to have, the more I'm going to learn. The more I learn, the more my options become open. But are there other benefits to being curious that go beyond the obvious? And if so, what are they?
Well, as I say, I mean, I think one of the places that I think we underappreciate curiosity is that curiosity is driven by the love of the idea rather than the need for that particular piece of information in the moment. And I think most of us are often very transactional in what we learn. So you know, if you, I mean, I talk about this all the time. We learn this in school. You know, that you get a, for example, college students get a syllabus at the start of the semester, and the syllabus communicates that the professor has a set of things that they think you need to know in order to have a particular expertise on the basis of the class. And then you, as a student in that class, look at the syllabus and think, well, yeah, the professor has laid out this set of things I think I need to know, but that's not all of it. The professor doesn't expect us to know all of it, right? There's only going to be a certain amount of stuff that's actually going to be tested. And so it leads to my least favorite question in classes, which is students will say, so is this going to be on the exam? And the idea behind that question is, can I game the system a little bit and only focus on the stuff I really need to know because I'm busy and learning is hard. And so let me be as efficient as possible. And because I believe deeply that curiosity matters, that you need to know way more than you think you need to know in order to be innovative and successful. When students ask me, is this going to be on the exam? What I say is yes, but it might not be my exam, right? Because you'll discover that you needed a piece of information later when it turns out to be useful. And I think that's really the counterweight. It's not that people aren't trying to learn stuff. It's that a lot of people are trying to be really efficient in what they learn and focus on the stuff they need to know. And my point is, you actually won't know what you needed to know until after you needed it. So you have to learn more than you think you need. You're mute.
Thanks for telling me. I had a dog barking in the background, so I didn't want that to come through. I read that there's benefits to being curious, like increased life satisfaction, increased happiness, longevity, better social relationships. Have you seen any studies that indicate that? Is there truth to it? And why would it be the case?
You know, as with everything, it depends a little bit on your environment and other things. I mean, I think that in a knowledge-rich environment like ours, feeling like you're constantly being exposed to new information, you're giving your brain an opportunity to grow connections between things by being exposed to new information. Those things are uplifting compared to people who essentially end up living their life in a rut, where they're engaging in the same activities over and over again. What learning does is, I mean, on the one hand, it's great for brain health because it just gives you more problem solving strategies, and so it doesn't protect your brain from damage, but it does protect you from damage to your brain, meaning that if the more things you know, the more strategies you have for learning, the more brain damage you would need before you showed a particular level of symptoms. So that's incredibly valuable. I think that learning a lot of new things makes time feel like it slows down. So one of the things that we know about time perception is that when you look back on time, and even your sense of how long something takes in the moment is based on how predictable it is, which is the reason, for example, why the drive to a place that you've never gone to before feels longer than the drive back, because you have to actually, there's more unexpected things that happen. When you're curious and you're learning new things, you're engaging in more unexpected activities that are hard to predict, and time feels like it slows down in the moment. And also, retrospectively, the more landmarks that you have that are unique, the longer a time frame feels when you look back on it. So if you look back over a month and all you did was go back and forth to work and then come home and watch the same TV programs on TV all the time, when you look back over that month, it will feel like nothing happened and it flew by. But if there's lots of unique things that happened, which could include engaging with some new ideas or reading a book on a new topic or having a fascinating conversation with somebody, retrospectively, that time frame feels longer as well.
Years ago, I read William James' 2-volume set, The Principles of Psychology. And I remember him talking about that. If you have a life filled with a lot of activities, a lot of things, going through it will seem quick, but in retrospect, because your mind is full of memories, it'll seem longer. Whereas if you're not doing anything, it'll seem like it takes forever to get through it. But then looking back, because there's nothing filling your memories, it would seem like it went by in a second. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And with what you just said, that the more curious you are, the more experiences you're going to have. So that actually, that would make sense.
Yeah, no, William James, everyone should go back and read. He had just such insight into the human condition in the absence of much data, because it was really at the front end of psychology being treated as a separate discipline. But yeah, and I will say the one thing that's interesting is there are two different ways that your current sense of time can be influenced, right? So being deeply engaged in something can lead to that kind of flow state in which time just feels like it rockets by. And certainly we've all had that experience of sitting in a waiting room where nothing is going on. And so all you can do is pay attention to the time, and that feels interminable. But there's a middle ground in there in which you are engaging in a lot of really new experiences, and it still does lengthen that feeling of time in the moment. So think about, for example, going on vacation somewhere. That first day of a vacation often feels incredibly long because it's filled with all of these new and interesting experiences. And so you're paying attention to a lot of things, and it so even in the moment, it feels long. And then it also casts a kind of long shadow in memory. But it's true that if you get into that real flow state where, as Csikszentmihalyi talked about, that flow state where you're working at that efficient edge of your capabilities, then absolutely time will feel like it rockets by, even though it creates a lot of beautiful memories in retrospect.
How did you pronounce the name? I've seen the name on Mahal. I thought it was Mahali, Mahali. How do you pronounce it?
That's how you know when you're a professional psychologist. So it's Mahai Csikszentmihalyi.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's for those folks who have never seen the name, look at it. There's a lot of C's and S's and Z's and things in it, and it ends in an I, but it's Csikszentmihalyi.
Okay, I'm glad to know it. I'll probably forget by the time we're done with the interview. But if I'm curious down the line, I'll come back and check.
There you go.
Something that I've spent a lot of time studying and trying to improve in myself is self-esteem. How does curiosity relate to self-esteem?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, this idea of how, there's several concepts that are bound up with each other. There's self-esteem. How am I feeling about myself? There's self-efficacy. How much do I feel like I can influence the world around me? And then there's self-confidence. How much do I feel like I can effectively do things in the world? So I am confident in my own knowledge and abilities and things like that. And they are related to the concepts are related to each other. And I think that it requires a certain degree of self-confidence and self-efficacy to be curious, because you have to believe that by looking something up, you can and studying it, that you're capable of learning it. I think there's a certain number of people who doubt their own abilities to learn, who shy away from being curious for two reasons, right? One, because they're not confident in their ability to learn something if they study it, but also because they view a lack of knowledge as a negative rather than as an opportunity. So this is where self-esteem comes in. So if you have low self-esteem, so you don't feel particularly good about yourself, if you encounter a concept you don't know anything about, you take that as a weakness of yourself, and you may not want to admit it to other people, and you hide that in ways that may actually lead you to just distance yourself from the recognition that there are things you don't know. Whereas when you have higher self-esteem, you don't necessarily equate your own lack of knowledge about something with that saying something about who you are as a person. And so you actually end up viewing your lack of knowledge about something as an opportunity. Hey, here's something I don't know anything about. Let me learn more about it. And so I think that you have to have a reasonable level of self-esteem in order to be willing to be curious, because you have to confront, hey, here's a thing I don't know about, but how cool is that? I don't know about it, so I can learn it. And the other element that's bound up with that is when you first learn about anything, you're not good at it.
No.
And that's true for knowledge and skills. I mean, I talk a lot about how I think it's really important every once in a while throughout your life to just start something new. So, for example, in my mid-30s, I took up the saxophone because I just wanted to, I learned to play the piano as a kid, but I thought the saxophone was cool, and I wanted to learn it, and I did learn it, but I sounded really bad at first. In fact, my oldest son was 7 when I took it up, and that very first night that I got it, after I got the sax, I got it. I had a new teacher. He taught me to get a sound out of it. I was so excited. I went home, and for about a half hour, which was all I could stand before my lip felt numb, I was trying to play it, and I had a great time. The next morning, my son woke up and he said, "Were you playing your new saxophone last night, Daddy?" And I said, "Yes, I was." He said, "I thought so. It sounded like you were moving chairs in the kitchen." So, there's a certain amount of self-esteem you have to say, you know what? Yep, you're right. I'm no good at this, but it's okay. It's a transitional phase, right? And eventually played well enough that I've played in some bands and things like that. But it's hard to not know stuff, and it's hard to publicly not know stuff. And so I think there's definitely a sense in which you have to recognize that a lack of knowledge and skills says more about opportunity to learn something in the past than it does about who you are as a person.
Much with self-esteem has what Nathaniel Branden called reciprocal causation. And it seems like this would be a similar case where if I have poor self-esteem, I'm not going to be curious. Not being curious, I'm not going to learn things. It's going to impact my self-esteem in a negative way. But the alternative would also be the case where if I have good self-esteem, I'm going to look for things to learn. The more I learn, the better I'm going to feel about myself. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. There's, everything builds on itself. We are a dynamic system in which decisions we make now or actions we take now influence our future state in ways that make certain things easier to do and certain things harder to do. And so we create pathways for ourselves. And so absolutely, having higher self-esteem can make you more likely to, or more willing to, engage with things. But of course, as with everything, it depends, right? Because there are also, for example, variations of narcissism that come along with high self-esteem. And not all, right? Some, the vulnerable narcissists tend to be.
Would it really though?
Yeah,
I mean, I know, like I've seen studies where they've claimed that, but then you have the narcissistic paradox, right? So I don't know if that would consider it like an authentic self-esteem. I guess it would depend on how you're defining your terms, though.
I would say too, right? I think being a narcissist is somewhat independent of overall self-esteem, but narcissists with high self-esteem tend to be what we call grandiose narcissists.
Okay.
And so they feel really good about themselves, right? The narcissists with low self-esteem, they tend to be the vulnerable narcissists, the ones who lash out in a rage when you question anything about them. But those with high self-esteem, they just tend to ignore you, right? And so when they are confronted with an area they don't know about, they're much more likely to just say, well, it just must not be that important, right? Because information, the light flows from the narcissist outward and not in the other direction. And so, I think there are a certain number of people who seem somewhat immune to learning new things despite having fairly high self-esteem. But I think that for most people, that having some degree of self-esteem, having reasonable self-confidence is really valuable in being willing to be vulnerable enough to recognize, I don't know this, I need to learn it, and I'm going to learn it. And for a while, as I learn it, I'm going to really be a novice. And I think it's a lot of us develop an area of expertise, and then we think, okay, great, so I know this thing, and we shouldn't mistake that for thinking we're an expert in everything. And so it's actually important. There's a self-esteem also promotes or enables, I guess a better word, enables humility, right? That which is an interesting paradox, right? That actually requires a certain amount of self-confidence to be humble about something, because what it says is, here's an area I know something in, and then here's an area I don't. And I'm willing to admit, hey, I don't know this. You're the expert in this, or somebody else is the expert. I would need to learn more about this in order to have expertise. So just because I'm good at one thing doesn't make me good at everything.
I like what you just said. It's like the sort of paradox where good self-esteem allows you to admit what you don't know. You're not so wrapped up in the judgments of others. You don't take it sort of as a indictment of the self. I remember one time I was facilitating a self-improvement group, and I made a mistake. I didn't know, I read the material. I said, oh man, I messed that up. I said it out loud in front of the whole group. Whatever, people make mistakes. And later on, another facilitator said to me, wow, man, when you messed up, you just admitted it right away, which told me that he wouldn't have done that. And I found that to be confirming of what you just said. Like, I understand that mistake is not a total reflection of who I am. And if the people in the group thought it was, who cares? Their thoughts have no power over me. Something else you said is, I think, important too. And it's sort of the willingness to be a novice, the willingness to enter situations where we're not going to be good. I used to like to watch shows like Dancing with the Stars, and it seems like a silly show, but I respected the fact that these people were willing to go into a role where they were going to look silly, they were going to challenge themselves way outside their comfort zone. And that seems to be what you're talking about. When you do new things, you're going to be a novice, right?
Yeah. You're gonna be a novice. You're gonna make mistakes. Some of those mistakes are going to be visible to other people. It's interesting. Related to that is learning new languages. So for a long time, there was this notion of a critical period for language learning. This idea that if you learned language as a child, you would attain native fluency, and that the later in life that you learned a language, the less able you were to achieve native fluency. And the belief was that there was something about the brain that prevented people from achieving native fluency if they learned later. And that idea has been chipped away at over the years in research, partly because one of the things that holds people back from becoming really great language speakers as an adult is just their unwillingness to sound stupid in front of others. And so, because if you don't make mistakes, you don't practice producing language, and you don't get, while you never get or rarely get direct feedback about language, you often do get indirect feedback, so that if you use a word in a wrong way, or particularly prepositions and things like that, a lot of times when you use a preposition in the wrong way, a native speaker will echo what you just said with the right preposition in a way that kind of helps you to develop a better understanding of the nuances of some of these really difficult aspects of language. And so the more recent work suggests that while it is difficult for people who learn languages as an adult to achieve true native fluency, it is much more about the way that adult learners engage with language than it is about limitations of the way the brain works that prevent people from achieving that fluency. And it's exactly that issue of, and it's one of the reasons why, we often wait in the United States to teach people a second language until they're in middle school, which is like the world's worst time to try to get somebody to look stupid in front of their peers.
Yeah, you're so preoccupied with what everyone else is thinking.
Yeah.
And of course, they're preoccupied with what you're thinking. It's a
Exactly.
very interesting thing. So curiosity has a lot of benefits. Can it be cultivated, and how? How can I cultivate it in myself? If I'm a boss in my employees, if I'm a parent, how do I cultivate it in my children? Can it be done, and how?
Yeah, I think this is one of these cases where that distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation actually, I think, has real value. I mean, there's over the years, we go back and forth on this about how important it is. But this idea of intrinsic motivation is how much do I feel rewarded for the activity itself? Extrinsic motivation is, I've got some external thing that gets me to do something. And I think with curiosity, recognizing the joy of learning a new thing, of discovering a new thing, that's one of the things that can really drive additional curiosity, is putting time into learning something and then recognizing the how much fun it is to have done that, and feeling the benefits of now having a new expertise, a new area of knowledge that you didn't have before. And so giving, with younger kids and with students, creating opportunities that exist at what Vygotsky called that zone of proximal development, one of my favorite concepts in all of psychology. So, Vygotsky, it's fascinating, right? Vygotsky was a Russian psychologist, and in Russia at the time he was working was very much about community and the social environment. And so he focused a lot on what is the influence of that social environment on learning. And he talked a lot about this idea of scaffolding experiences for students, right? So you build an experience that's just beyond what they're capable of, and then you give them an opportunity to explore in that environment and to learn a thing. And when you want to promote curiosity, what you do is you find a topic that is just at the leading edge of what a student or a kid is able to learn, and then you give them that opportunity to explore that topic and feel that joy of mastering something that yesterday they didn't know. But then you take an extra step, which is to get them to reflect on that a little bit. Like, how cool was that you did this, you spent this time on this in this task and left it knowing something you didn't know before. How good did that feel? Really reflect on that and use that knowledge, that self-knowledge of how cool that was, to be a driver for how you approach the next new thing. And you go chasing that joy of learning a new thing. And that, that then feeds on itself, because then, while nobody's going to be an expert in everything, the more curious you are, the more stuff you know about more things, which makes it easier to learn new things about the world, because you feel like you at least have some passing understanding of things, enough to understand an article you read about it, or to learn from a conversation with another person, or to attend a lecture as an adult, whatever it is. And so it definitely feeds on itself in that kind of reciprocal way you were talking about earlier.
Well, now I'm curious. I got to ask, who's superior when it comes to learning, Piaget or Vygotsky?
They're different sides of a coin, right? If you think about the orientations that they took, Piaget was all about understanding the mechanisms of the individual as they navigated their conceptual development, their cognitive development. And Vygotsky was all about that social environment. I would say you need both. You need to understand the capacities of individuals, but you also need to understand that social environment. I would say that given the orientation of most of us in Western environments, in which we spend a lot of time thinking about how great we are as individuals, having someone like Vygotsky, who makes such a compelling case for the importance of the social environment and learning, probably teaches us more, because it pulls us outside of our personal comfort zone to think about the influence of that social environment on learning. So it's not that one of them is better than the other. I think Vygotsky's work is often more valuable for people to think about, because we kind of get to thinking about our individual capacities just by virtue of being, growing up in a Western society.
He also died very young, right,
Yes.
Vygotsky?
Yeah.
So who knows what he could have accomplished had he lived.
Yeah, that's right. And other people have taken up that mantle over the years to really look at that influence of the social environment. And that idea of building scaffolding is deeply embedded in a lot of education work. When we teach people how to design a curriculum and how to design a great learning environment, we do spend a lot more time thinking about finding that zone of proximal development for people, and then helping to build learning environments that give people enough stability to be able to achieve the next goal. And it's unfortunate that so much of education has become about passing tests and rote learning and things like that, because I do feel like I joke a lot that part of the problem with modern education is that we want to create bright, creative students by making sure that everybody gets the same answer on the state test.
Good point. Okay, is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have asked related to the topic?
We could go on about this forever. It's such a fascinating topic, but I think we did a good job of covering the waterfront to get started.
Awesome. Okay, well, where can the audience find you? I know you got this blog, you got a podcast. Where can they get you?
So the easiest way to find the stuff I do is I'm on LinkedIn. I got an author page on Facebook. I'm active on what is now called X and Threads and things like that.
Oh, that drive you crazy, X.
Yeah, I know. So let's stick with LinkedIn and maybe the Facebook author page. But I write a weekly thing for Fast Company Online. I write as often as I can for Psychology Today. And I do have a radio show and podcast called Two Guys on Your Head, which has the benefit, if nothing else, of being 7.5 minutes long. So it isn't an incredibly significant time investment, but it's for those people who are kind of old NPR listeners, we're sort of like car talk, but for the mind.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Leibowitz. Remember, let me know what you think. Till next time.